Hello folks, Andy here for What Culture Wrestling, and the latest episode of Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions is in the books. Seth Rollins is the guest, and I'm going to pick it apart for you. So let's not waste any time, let's just get into it. Here are 10 things that we learned from Seth Rollins on Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions. Number 10, he's a little bit salty. Salty about what, you might ask? Well, it is of course his match with the Fiend Bray Wyatt from Hell in a Cell 2019, which, as is brought up by Steve Austin, scored the dubious honour of being the Wrestling Observer's worst match, voted for by the readership of 2019. When this is brought up, it provokes quite an interesting response in Rollins, who reacts in a way that suggests that he's not exactly the kind of guy who doesn't care about this kind of thing. He goes, yeah, awarded by whom? Awarded by whom? Kind of laughing into his Broken Skull IPA, and the way he laughs about it and looks away and addresses it doesn't exactly suggest a guy who isn't bothered by this. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that reading Seth's reaction here, this might have upset him a little bit. Being awarded this might have pissed him off, and it should. This guy's a professional. He's put years of blood, sweat, tears, and every other cliche you can think into honing his craft. For a guy who's seemingly as proud as Seth is to come away and been told he's had the worst match of the year must have stung. I don't blame him for it at all, but given the amount of times that he has clashed personally with Dave Meltzer in particular on social media, I think it's a pretty interesting response, nonetheless. Number 9, he was ready to strangle Vince McMahon. This is, of course, the big headline coming out of this video. It is Rollins' reaction to that match at Hell in a Cell 2019, which he acknowledges, yeah, it wasn't very good. It didn't come out the way anyone would have hoped for. The crowd rejected it. They were pissed. They were angry. And apparently so was Seth, who came backstage full of thunder, ready to confront Vince McMahon. And, you know, there's no better way of telling this than by reading to you the man's own words. Here's what he had to say. At the time, I came through the curtain and I was ready to strangle Vince McMahon. I'm not kidding you, TJ Wilson was there to hold me back. I stared right into Vince's eyes. I looked at him, he looked at me. We didn't say a single word to each other, and he walked out. Now, Seth goes on to explain that they had a more civil conversation to iron things out the following day. But it's a good job old TJ Wilson, old Tyson Kidd was there to hold him back a little bit, because yeah, I can't imagine that strangling Vince McMahon would have done wonders for his career prospects. Number 8, Hell in a Cell didn't go the way that he and Wyatt wanted. In the interview here, Rollins outright says that the version of him versus The Fiend that we eventually got at Hell in a Cell 2019 wasn't what he envisioned when the match first came together. It didn't match what he had in his head. Rather than towing the company line, Rollins just explains that, yeah, this match wasn't what we wanted. He doesn't go as far as like pinpointing any alternative ideas him or Wyatt may have had for it, but you know, given the red lights and the finisher no cells and the comedy hammer and I guess the thunderous boos as well, it's safe to say that it wouldn't have taken a lot to improve on this all-time harmful match that took Wyatt and Rollins a long time to get over, if they even did. Number 7, he signed with TNA. Sort of. Rollins told a story about his time in Ring of Honor. When that time was coming to an end, he had a conversation with Joey Mercury, who was with the promotion at the time, pulled him aside one day and said, hey man, have you ever thought about New York? New York being WWE, of course. And this led to Seth, performing as Tyler Black at the time, compiling some tape, compiling some material, and sending it off to Johnny Ace in the hope of making it to the biggest league of the big leagues. Big leagues, big promotion. The thing about this was that while WWE were initially slow to response, Seth had actually agreed a verbal deal with the competition, with TNA, and sounds very much like he was ready to follow up on that, until he received a phone call from one Jim Cornette who chewed him the hell out and told him he was making a big mistake, changing Seth's mind in the process. Rollins, like any smart businessman, like any good negotiator, leveraged this. He called up Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, and said, hey man, got this TNA deal, I'm gonna take it. And that eventually led to WWE extending an offer, getting their act together, and Rollins ending up with the biggest promotion in the world. Number 6, his first experience in WWE sucked. So Rollins ends up leaving Ring of Honor and he comes into WWE through FCW, the old developmental territory, and not a good experience. He comes up to what is described as a sweatbox warehouse in Tampa Bay, Florida, when he's perhaps expecting some kind of first-class performance center-like facility, the kind of which we have now. He turns up there, describing it as a piece of shit in the middle of nowhere, and even worse is that trainer Tom Pritchard doesn't even know he's going to be there. No one's told him. And compounding all of this is that when Rollins got there, it was full of people who, in his own words, couldn't wrestle. It was full of people with no experience in the sport whatsoever, so when he turned up to this tin pot facility in the middle of nowhere, no one informed the head trainer he was going to be there and no one can bloody work. Yeah, in his own words, it felt like a downgrade. It felt like he'd taken a step back, which, when you consider the state-of-the-art facilities that WWE has today at the Performance Center, it's pretty incredible to think about. This wasn't all that long ago, but things have come a long, long way in that time. Number 5. Triple H almost fired him. Rollins explained in the interview that the confidence he gained from listening to advice from Dusty Rhodes in NXT led to him butting heads with a few people along the way, including Terry Taylor, with whom he clashed on a number of occasions in NXT. In his own words, Seth didn't like being told what to do. He didn't want to change, so when he was being told to change by Terry, yeah, they clashed a lot of the time, and this led to Seth gaining the reputation for being insubordinate. Ultimately, this led to Triple H pulling him aside saying, hey, you're not special, and if you don't want to do what we tell you, if you want to do things your way, you can just go back to Ring of Honor, pal. It was in this moment that Rollins realised that maybe his dream was about to go up in smoke, and it's safe to say there were no hard feelings once all this was ironed out, because a few months later, he was NXT champion. Number 4. Competition in the Shield. This is something we've always kind of assumed, and it's something that the other guys in the Shield have spoken on as well, but it was kind of cool to learn of the friendly competition that existed within the Shield members during their time in WWE. Rollins noted that even when it was clear that Roman Reigns was going to be the focus and WWE were constructing spots that Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose were in to make Roman look good, there was no ill will, there was no bad feelings, it was a friendly competition between 3 guys who became friends, who wanted to drive each other to do the best. They never once considered going into business for themselves, and all knew that, hey look, even if Roman comes out of this the guy, if we push forward, if we put our best foot forward with this, we're all going to come out of this stable looking good. And I think it's safe to say that that's probably one of the big reasons why the Shield is remembered today as maybe one of the greatest stables, it's not a maybe actually, as one of the greatest stables in WWE history. Number 3. He was hurt by WrestleMania 35. Rollins thought heading into WrestleMania 35 that with a Universal title clash with Brock bloody Lesnar on the horizon, that the main event spot was probably his to lose. So it came as a bit of a disappointment then when he learned that he wasn't going to be headlining. It was going to be his wife-to-be, Becky Lynch, against Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey, Raw Women's title, SmackDown Women's title, historic first women's main event in WrestleMania history. Now, while Seth was obviously very pleased for Becky in this history-making moment and everything else, it was a disappointment to him. He was a little bit upset because at this stage in his career, he still hasn't entered WrestleMania as the headliner on the card. But the good news is that he ended up happy with what happened. He was happy with the match, and he even brought back a massive bucket of Coors Light to earn his respect after the bell. Lord knows what kind of sesh the Beast had after that, but fair play. Professionally, might be a little bit disappointing not getting the main event and being at that stage in your career and having not achieved that goal, having not written that off the bucket list. But probably hard for him to get too upset considering who was in the actual main event. Becky Lynch, winning both titles, big moment for her, and they're married and have a kid now, so yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine. Number 2. Why the babyface run flopped. It's safe to say that Seth Rollins' run as a babyface Universal Champion didn't go the way people would have wanted. Fans started turning on him. There was some ugly scenes in cities like Toronto where the fans have always been a little bit more vocal than everywhere else, but it was reflective of a wider attitude. Now, Seth went into detail onto why he felt this didn't work on the interview here, a number of things he brought up, including maybe WWE didn't line up the strongest array of heels for him to beat. But he also touched on the creativization, is that even a word, bringing his real-life relationship with Becky Lynch to on-screen. He didn't like that at all, he was against it from the start, and Austin himself admitted that a line should probably have been drawn between real life and what happens on the programming. Rollins said, and I think I agree with this to be honest with him, that he came out of the situation looking a little bit wimpy, particularly for a top guy or someone who was supposed to be perceived as a top guy in the company. Becky, on the other hand, was alright, she recovered, but for Seth, wasn't a good time. Number 1. What the future holds. Rollins comes to the end of the interview here and acknowledges that at 35 years old he has accomplished so much of what he wanted to do in the wrestling business, but he still has a bucket list left, and one of those items on that is headlining WrestleMania. On top of this, he will never get sick of performing for WWE crowds. He loves this stuff and doesn't ever see the thrill going away. But he does state right at the end here that his contract is up in a couple more years, and when we get to that stage, he's going to see what happens. He's going to figure out what to do next. Now, I think it's impossible to listen to these words and go, he's going to AEW, which is often the temptation in situations like this. But it's still pretty interesting to think about this guy who, mid-30s, prime of his life, but his priorities have changed. He's already been a world champion. He's already been a main eventer now. He's got a daughter. He's married, maybe. Him and Becky want more kids. His priorities have shifted. And I think it's a pretty interesting note to end on for this guy who's so often perceived as the company guy in WWE. Definitely some food for thought at the end of a fun interview. Very refreshing. But as always, guys, I want to know your take on the matter, so hit up the comment section below and let us know what you think. I thought it was very open, refreshing and honest, particularly from someone like Seth Rollins, who you might not expect that from. So fair play to him, and fair play to Austin for doing a great job with the interview as always. Once you've done that, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Then you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE and myself at Andy H. Murray. You can tell me how wrong I am right there. Goodbye.